Hello friends and welcome back to Silverhawk Farm. Today I am making some biscuits and gravy, and I am not using anything from my garden or anything like that. I just need to use up some of this lovely ground pork that I got from a local farmer and I had thawed out, and it sounded good. I use Alton Brown's Serious Eats drop biscuit recipe. It is the best. It works out perfectly every time that I've used it, and I have never veered from it ever since starting to use it. So that is what my go-to. I will post the link down in the show notes below. So one thing I like to do is use frozen butter when I'm making this recipe, or any recipe where I want there to be like a lot of fluffiness and flakiness to it. That way, if you like overmix or you have hot hands, you don't have to worry about it melting before it gets to the oven. Because when it melts and it gets into the oven, the water that's in the butter will actually evaporate, and that's what creates those really nice pockets that make such a fluffy, amazing biscuit. So we've got the wrapper off. This is 4 ounces, 113 grams of butter. I have actually doubled the recipe that you will find on the Serious Eats website. I find that my family eats a lot of biscuits, even when we are out of gravy, so we will snack on these for the rest of the day. Just cutting this in half, cutting that in half. These have been sitting out for about 20 minutes now, so they're cutting up a lot. It's not giving me too much trouble. If you didn't have a bench scraper, you could totally do this with, like, I'd use maybe like a larger knife rather than using a butter knife, because it is a lot of work to get it down. Okay, so we've got our all-purpose flour here. I do prefer to use a scale anytime I'm measuring with flour, because flour compacts, so it can be kind of imprecise when you're using it with scoops. And then I'm adding 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Whisk those up so they're evenly distributed throughout. I need 1 teaspoon of salt. I love my little salt caddy. Highly recommend if you bake or cook a lot. It's nice for pinching. You need a pinching this thing. That's why you need a salt caddy, so you can pinch it. Whisking the salt in. Trying not to think about the fact that you used way too small of a container for this job. It's okay, it'll also get quite mixed up in the mixer. So we've got our very cold butter here in the food processor. We're going to be mixing up just a bit before adding the flour, and then we'll ultimately want the butter bits to be pea-sized or a little bit larger. So we'll get those mixed up, and then we'll get our flour added. So, I actually like to spoon things right out of the mixer. It makes so much less of a mess. I only have one thing to clean. My preferred tools are a large spoon and a spatula. I use the large spoon to get a large spoonful, then I use the spatula to get it off. And then I repeat a whole bunch of times. Okay, so I think I might be able to fit them. It's probably ill-advised, but I don't feel like cleaning my other pan. We'll see. We'll see what I can get away with. Trying to be quick about it before they get warm. Which is, again, why I use frozen butter to begin with. If you are a person who gets frequently interrupted by children, give yourself some extra time. Use frozen butter. Hello, We are back and we are ready to mix up some seasoning to make this regular ground pork into proper breakfast sausage, which is what I would recommend for any sort of breakfast gravy. So we're going to be making that. Nico's ready to stir. And I have to be able to pour though. All right, I'm going to be using this recipe for Jimmy Dean breakfast sausage. I'll be sure to link it down below. You need a teaspoon of salt. Okay. Half teaspoon of cayenne. Yeah, you don't need the cayenne. I don't think that's a good idea. Thank you. Yeah, stir that up. It says to use sage, but I can't find mine. Black pepper, I'm gonna need to wait a second because this one will not let me grind anything. 1/4 teaspoon. All that good. Oh, thank you, good. No, you don't wanna eat that, that's spicy. Little bit of MSG. We love MSG. Coriander. Yeah, that's true. That's okay, I gotta grind the pepper. Alright, we got that all mixed up so it's evenly dispersed. Kind of lackadaisical, but most of those called for a 1/4 teaspoon. I eyeballed it, it's fine. Hi! I need you to be back for this next part though. I don't want you to get hurt. Alright, so once you've moved your toddler outside of the oil splatter zone, you can go ahead and continue with the recipe. He's really enjoying helping though. My favorite way to get meat out of these tube things is just to cut it in half with a sharp knife, which I'm sure is not good for my knives, but you know what, whatever. Make sure this is nice and oiled. Just smoosh it. Good smooshing, good smooshing. And since we're just now mixing up this herb mix, I'm just gonna pour it over while it's cooking and that's gonna be fine. All right, so we've got our meat really nicely browned. If anyone noticed, I did sneak in a little bit of the butter there, and the reason I did that was to make it so that it was frying a little bit more in the fat. I was noticing that this particular meat was not super fatty and was not giving me the crispy brown bits that I wanted. So adding a little bit of butter helped that a lot. And so I'm gonna go ahead and start doing kind of like a lazy roux. We're gonna be adding some butter and some flour, but we're gonna be doing it just over top of stuff and then mixing the heck out of it. And then we'll add our dairy once we have those things incorporated. So I don't really have a recipe I follow for the actual gravy because it's one of those like, my grandmother made the recipe and so I know how to make it things. But I'm throwing like 2 tablespoons of butter in there for now. You generally want to do equal parts butter and flour. So I'm going to throw 2 tablespoons of flour over the top of this whole situation. Nico's eating a snack. He's yelling about it, as you often do. All right, we're mixing this in, and see that the flour isn't really clumping up because there's enough fat on the meat. So if you were to use a different type of meat for this, say you were to use like turkey, that's a really low fat meat, so you'd want to add quite a bit of fat to get that lovely texture we're getting from the crispiness. If you were going with like a mushroom, like you're making it vegan or vegetarian, I would recommend same deal, crisp the hell out of it. And I'd recommend something like kind of a meaty mushroom, like a portobello, something that can stand some abuse, you know? And you can't really tell now that it's absorbed, but once I add milk, it'll thicken up quite a bit. If you were buying breakfast sausage from a store and you like heat, I would recommend going with like the medium or hot sausage. It's gonna add a lot of flavor. There we go. And that'll bring down the temp quite a bit. I lowered the heat and then just let it simmer for a minute while that flour kind of comes out and mixes into the milk. And while you do that, get your dog because he's barking and you're trying to record a YouTube video. I'll be back. Now that you have escorted your dog to the basement, and this is simmered for just a bit, do you see how quickly it became clumpy? I was gone for like 10 seconds. That was not long. But it's getting all nice and mixed in. I like to give it a chance to set a bit before I start to flavor it. Add a little bit more milk now that it's nice and thick. And we don't want any of that like raw flour flavor. If you ever have an issue with like gravies and things having a raw flour flavor, that's because it's undercooked. You just need to give it more time to cook. I'm using my flat spoon and I'm scraping along the bottom a whole lot to make sure that all of those delicious meat bits are becoming part of the gravy. I'm gonna add a little bit of hot sauce, a little bit of salt. That was probably like half a teaspoon of salt, if we're guesstimating. A little bit of MSG. I'm gonna get a tiny bit of white pepper. I love the flavor of white pepper. And a little bit of fussy toddler, and a little bit of Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire is nice in anything savory because it just adds like a lot of depth of flavor. But you don't add too much because it can be overpowering. All right, so we've got our gravy finished. We've got our biscuits out of the oven and cooled off just a tiny bit. And this is still very boiling. So I'm gonna go ahead and get plated up and try it out for y'all. So my deal is I just go straight over the biscuits. And then I cut up the biscuits into small pieces. If that is the incorrect way to do it, please argue amongst yourselves in the comments. All right, so we've got our delicious food. We've got this off, I promise. It's just still trying to boil. Let's try her out. Look, this is not like a health food recipe. It's not a light meal, but it is hearty comfort food at its finest. And I'm obsessed with it. It's so good. Well, I so appreciate everyone hanging out with me today while I make this delicious, delicious meal. And I hope you try it. I know that I didn't give a super exact recipe, but I'll try and give my best approximation here in the show notes. And definitely hit me up if you do make it. Send me some pictures. I would love to see. You can find me on Instagram under silverhawk.farm. And I am going to let my husband know that breakfast is ready before I go out to the garden because I still have a ton of work to do today. But I hope that I will see you all soon. I hope you're having a lovely, lovely day wherever you are. So what I use for biscuits and gravy is actually a drop biscuits recipe. I use Elton John. No, not Elton John. I wish I had Elton John's biscuits and gravy recipe. Jeez.